places in the American wilderness where things don't follow the rules, where the trees grow too thick, the shadows stretch too long, and the silence feels like it's watching you back. Ryan Mitchell didn't believe in any of that supernatural bullshit, past tense. Didn't. Because what happened in the Olympic Peninsula backcountry turned a skeptic into someone who checks his locks 3 times before bed and sleeps with a loaded shotgun within arm's reach. The thing about hunting something that shouldn't exist is nobody prepares you for it in ranger training. They teach you bear encounters, search and rescue, wilderness survival. They don't teach you what to do when you're staring at 8 feet of walking nightmare that looks back at you with eyes that understand exactly what you're thinking. Ryan learned that lesson the hard way, and the scars, mental more than physical, still haven't healed 3 years later. This story, it's going to challenge everything you think you know about what lives in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest. And before you roll your eyes and click away thinking this is another Bigfoot hoax story, let me tell you something. Ryan Mitchell spent 15 years as a park ranger in Olympic National Park. 15 years of facing down black bears, rappelling cliff faces in storms, dealing with armed poachers at 2 in the morning. The man's no fool, and he's damn sure no liar. What he captured, what he documented, what he barely survived, it's all real. Every terrifying second of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how a decorated park ranger with a spotless record ended up becoming the only person to successfully track, document, and capture one of the most elusive creatures on the planet. Because this changes everything. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You want me to just get to the good stuff, right? The monster, the chase, the nightmare fuel. And trust me, we'll get there. But here's the thing about real stories, the kind that actually happen to real people in the real world. They don't start with the monster. They start with normal people having a normal day, right up until the moment when normal gets ripped apart and scattered across the forest floor. So stick with me, because what starts as a missing person case turns into something that'll make your skin crawl. And if you're the type who likes to go camping or hiking in remote areas, you might want to rethink that after hearing what Ryan and his team discovered up in those mountains. Before we dive in, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I post stories like this every week. Real accounts, real people, real terror. The algorithm doesn't always show my videos to everyone, so subscribing is the best way to make sure you don't miss the next one. Plus, if we hit 10,000 subscribers this month, I'm going to cover the Dyatlov Pass incident with some newly declassified information that'll blow your mind. So subscribe, stick around, and let's get into this. All right. Olympic National Park, Washington State, September 2021. Ryan Mitchell started his Thursday like he'd started 1,000 Thursdays before. Coffee at 5:30 in the morning, dark and bitter enough to strip paint. Quick check of the weather reports, clear skies, temperature dropping to the low 40s at night. Perfect conditions for the early fall hiking season. He drove his Park Service truck from his cabin in Port Angeles to the ranger station at Hurricane Ridge, windows down, breathing in that crisp mountain air that still smelled like summer pine and the first hints of autumn decay. 42 years old, lean and weathered from years of outdoor work, Ryan looked like exactly what he was, a guy who'd spent more time in the wilderness than in civilization. His ranger uniform was faded in all the places that came from actual field work, not the crisp pressed look of the office types. He had that quiet confidence of someone who'd faced down every natural threat these mountains could throw at him and walked away every single time. He'd been working Olympic National Park for 15 years. Before that, 5 years with the Forest Service in Montana. The man knew wilderness survival, like most people knew their daily commute. Black bears? He'd dealt with dozens, including a defensive mama bear that charged him from 30 feet away. Mountain lions? Tracked 3 of them after livestock kills near park boundaries. Avalanche rescues, cliff rappels, lost hikers in whiteout conditions. Ryan had seen it all and handled it all with calm professionalism. Nothing in his experience prepared him for what locals would start calling the Ridge Runner. The first sign something was wrong came at 8:47 that Thursday morning. Ashley Chen stumbled into the Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center looking like she'd gone 10 rounds with a wood chipper. Her expensive Patagonia jacket was shredded down the back, 3 parallel gashes running through the fabric and into the day pack underneath. Her hands shook so bad she could barely hold the coffee. Emma Rodriguez, the front desk ranger, tried to give her. "Something followed me," Ashley whispered, staring at nothing. Her eyes had that 1,000-yard stare Ryan had seen before, usually on hikers who'd gotten lost for days or survived near fatal falls. Pure trauma. From Grey Wolf Ridge all the way down to Obstruction Point. I could hear it breathing behind me, but every time I turned around, nothing was there. Then it screamed. Ryan leaned against the counter, studying her carefully. Ashley was a nature photographer from Seattle, according to her permit. She'd gone out before dawn to catch the sunrise over the interior peaks, a common enough practice. But the look on her face, that wasn't someone who'd gotten spooked by a deer or a bear. "What kind of scream?" Ryan asked, keeping his voice calm and professional. Ashley's hands trembled harder, like a freight train mixed with a dying elk. It echoed through the whole valley. "I've been hiking these mountains for 10 years, and I've never heard anything like it." She pulled out her camera with shaking hands, nearly dropping it twice before managing to pull up the last photo on the memory card. The image was blurry as hell, motion blur and wrong focus, the kind of shot you get when you're running and shooting blind. But even through the blur, Ryan could make out something massive and dark moving between the trees, too tall to be a bear, too broad to be a person. The shape was wrong in ways that made his brain itch. "That's what was following you?" Emma asked, squinting at the screen. "That's what I saw when I finally looked back," Ashley said. "Just for a second, between the trees. Then I ran. I ran for 3 miles straight without stopping." Ryan exchanged a look with Emma. They got spooked hikers sometimes, especially solo ones who let their imagination run wild in the backcountry. But Ashley didn't seem like the type. She had professional photography equipment worth thousands of dollars. Her permit history showed dozens of overnight trips into remote areas. This wasn't some tourist freaking out over shadows. "Did you see it clearly, at any point?" Ryan asked. "Size? Color? Anything specific?" "Dark brown or black, maybe 8 feet tall. Moving on 2 legs, but..." Ashley trailed off, struggling for words. The way it moved wasn't right. Not like a person, not like a bear standing up. It moved like walking on 2 legs was natural for it. You know, fluid, fast. Ryan took down her full statement, collected copies of her photos, and sent her home with the standard advice about wildlife encounters. But something about the whole thing bothered him. He couldn't put his finger on exactly what, but 15 years of experience had given him good instincts about when something was off. Those instincts proved right 2 days later, when the Garcia family never came back from their camping trip to Deer Park. The missing persons call came in Saturday afternoon. Miguel Garcia's brother hadn't heard from them since Thursday night, when Miguel had sent a text saying they'd set up camp, and the kids were having a great time. The family of 4, Miguel, his wife Carmen, and their 2 kids aged 8 and 10, should have been back Friday evening. When they didn't show and didn't answer calls, the brother drove to their house and found it empty, the dog unfed, mail piling up. Ryan was part of the search team that hiked into Deer Park that evening. They found the Garcia campsite just before sunset, and what they found made Ryan's jaw clench. The tent was shredded, not torn or collapsed, but deliberately ripped to pieces, with strips of fabric scattered across 50 yards of forest floor. Sleeping bags were pulled out and thrown into trees. Cooking equipment was scattered and dented, and Miguel Garcia's hiking boot was hanging from a tree branch 12 feet off the ground. "No way that got up there naturally," Derek Thompson said, staring up at the boot. Derek was former Army, built like a linebacker, and had joined the Park Service after 2 tours in Afghanistan. The man had seen some shit, and he didn't spook easy. But his voice had an edge Ryan had never heard before. Wind could have Emma started. Wind doesn't throw a size 11 hiking boot, 12 feet vertical, Ryan interrupted, studying the scene. That took strength, a lot of it. They spent the last hour of daylight searching the immediate area, calling out for the Garcia family. No response, no sign of them, except the destroyed campsite, and that boot hanging like some kind of warning. As darkness fell, they had to pull back and wait for the full search and rescue team to arrive in the morning. Standard protocols said they shouldn't be out there at night, not without proper backup and equipment. But as they hiked back down the trail by headlamp, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. "You feel that?" Derek asked quietly. "Yeah," Ryan admitted, "like something's pacing us just off the trail." Emma, ahead of them, stopped walking. "Guys, listen." They froze, clicking off their headlamps. In the sudden darkness, Ryan heard it, breathing, deep, rhythmic inhalations somewhere in the trees to their right. Too loud for a person, too controlled for an animal. Each breath lasted maybe 5 seconds, followed by an exhale that sounded like steam escaping under pressure. The three of them stood there in the dark for what felt like an hour but was probably only 2 minutes. The breathing continued, never coming closer, never retreating, just there. Listening to them, listen to it. "Back to the truck," Ryan said quietly. "Slowly. Don't run." They made it back without incident, but nobody spoke during the drive back to the station. What the hell do you say when you're all thinking the same impossible thought? The full search and rescue operation launched Sunday morning. 40 personnel from 3 counties, K9 units, a helicopter with thermal imaging. They found no trace of the Garcia family. No bodies, no signs of where they'd gone after the campsite was destroyed. It was like they'd been plucked off the face of the earth. But they found other things. Footprints pressed deep into the mud near the campsite, 17 inches long, 8 inches wide at the bowl. The depth suggested something weighing at least 400 pounds, maybe more. The stride length between prints was 9 feet. 9 feet between steps meant legs longer than any human walking gait could produce. Ryan knelt beside the clearest print, using his own boot for scale. His size 12 looked like a child's shoe next to it. "That's fresh," Emma said, examining the edges. "Maybe 12 hours old. See how sharp the impression is. No debris, no weathering." Derek was taking photos and measurements, his military training kicking in. Bipedal. But the gait's all wrong. Weight distribution favors the outer edge. This thing's anatomy is completely different from human. Look at the toe spread that's for power and stability on rough terrain. Sheriff Brandon Harris arrived an hour later with the county forensics team. He was a good guy, practical and no nonsense. But even he looked unsettled by what they were documenting. "So what are we dealing with here?" Harris asked, studying the plaster cast Derek had made of the footprint. "Bear? Bears don't walk on 2 legs for extended distances," Ryan said. "And they don't throw hiking boots into trees or arrange their weight distribution like this. So what then?" Harris's tone suggested he already knew the answer, but didn't want to say it. Nobody answered, because saying it out loud, giving voice to the impossible, would make it real in a way that felt dangerous. The story hit the local news Sunday night. Missing family, mysterious circumstances, no leads. Within 24 hours, the campground was closed, and they'd pulled rangers from other districts to handle the media circus and worried calls from hikers. Within 48 hours, 3 more incidents were reported. A trail runner swore something paced him for 2 miles along the Elwha River Trail, staying just out of sight in the tree line, but matching his speed perfectly. When he'd stopped, exhausted, the sounds had stopped. When he started running again, they resumed. The runner was a marathon veteran, not some out-of-shape tourist. He knew the difference between paranoia and being hunted. A group of college students, camping at Seven Lakes Basin, found their entire campsite rearranged while they slept. Food supplies were taken out of their bare canisters, which required thumbs and understanding how the locking mechanisms worked, and stacked in geometric patterns, 20 yards from their tent. The students swore they hadn't heard a thing all night, which was impossible if a person had done it. Moving that much gear in the dark would have made noise. The third incident was the one that convinced Sheriff Harris to put together a formal tracking team. A family camping at Ozette Lake woke to find massive handprints on their tent fabric. The prints showed what looked like elongated human hands, but much larger, and they were on the outside of the tent at a height of 7 feet off the ground. Whatever made them had pressed its hands against the tent and just stood there, watching them sleep. "We've got a problem," Harris said at the emergency meeting Tuesday morning, spreading photos across the conference table. "Whatever this thing is, it's getting bolder. The attacks are escalating. Next time, somebody's going to die." He assigned 3 of them to a dedicated tracking team. Ryan, because he knew these mountains better than anyone. Emma, because she was the best tracker on staff and could follow a deer trail through a thunderstorm. And Derek, because his military background included non-lethal capture training for insurgents, and those same principles could theoretically apply to dangerous wildlife. Wildlife. Ryan almost laughed at the term. Whatever was out there wasn't wildlife in any sense, he understood. They spent Tuesday mapping all the incident locations on a topographic chart of the park. The pattern was obvious once you laid it out visually. All the encounters clustered in a 5-mile radius deep in the backcountry, areas where cell service died and hiking trails became vague suggestions rather than maintained paths. The cluster centered around a region called Devil's Basin, a remote valley that saw maybe 10 visitors a year. If something wanted to hide in these mountains, Emma said, studying the map, it picked the perfect territory. Wednesday morning, they geared up and hiked into Devil's Basin. Full tracking equipment, weapons, tranquilizer rifles and bear spray, emergency beacons, and enough supplies for 3 days if needed. The plan was simple: find the creature's territory, gather evidence, determine what they were dealing with, then figure out next steps. Ryan had been hiking these trails for 15 years, but he'd only been into Devil's Basin twice. The terrain was rough, the access difficult, and frankly there was no reason to patrol it regularly. Now he wondered what they'd been missing all this time, what had been living up there while rangers stayed in the easier access areas. They found the first real track Wednesday afternoon near Whisper Creek, a footprint pressed deep into mud beside the water, perfect impression preserved in the soft earth. 17 inches long, 8 inches wide, with clear toe definition. Fresh, Emma said, kneeling beside it. Maybe 6 hours old. See how the edges are still sharp. No debris, no water seepage yet. Derek studied it with his military analytical mind. Bipedal, heavy, adapted for power, not speed. But look at the toe configuration. That's almost prehensile, designed for gripping uneven terrain. They followed the trail for 3 miles, watching the prints change as the terrain shifted. On rocky ground, they found only scratches and disturbed stones. In soft earth, the full outline emerged, those impossible feet that looked human but stretched to proportions that shouldn't exist. The tracks led them deeper into territory Ryan rarely patrolled. The canopy grew thick enough to block satellites, and GPS signals got flaky. The silence felt unnatural. Even the bird songs seemed muted, like the wildlife knew something was wrong and was keeping quiet to avoid attention. That's when they found the feeding site. A deer carcass hung wedged between 2 branches 15 feet above the ground. Not caught there by accident, placed there deliberately. The carcass was methodically stripped of meat in precise sections, leaving bones that showed teeth marks unlike anything in their wildlife database. Too large for coyotes, wrong pattern for bears, and arranged with what Ryan could only describe as intelligence. It's storing food, Emma whispered, caching it like a bear, but the placement is wrong. No bear climbs that high to hang meat. Look at the cutting pattern, Derek said, examining the bones. Those bites are systematic, almost surgical. Ryan studied the tree trunk. Deep claw marks gouged the bark, going up, grooves about 2 inches apart. Whatever climbed this has hands, not paws, hands with claws. They made camp a 1/4 mile downstream, far enough to avoid the smell but close enough to monitor the area. Standard protocol said call for backup, wait for additional rangers and wildlife specialists. But every day they delayed meant more hikers at risk, more families potentially facing whatever the Garcias had faced. The thing found them that night. Ryan's motion sensors went off at 2:15 a.m., not the steady beep of small wildlife, but the rapid pulse that meant something large was moving through their detection grid. He was awake instantly, hand reaching for his flashlight. Emma was already sitting up in her sleeping bag, eyes wide. You hear that? The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no nightbirds, no wind. In 15 years of camping in these mountains, Ryan had never experienced quiet that absolute. It felt like the entire wilderness was holding its breath. Then came the breathing. Deep, rhythmic inhalations somewhere beyond their firelight. Too loud for human, too controlled for animal. Each breath lasted 5 seconds, followed by an exhale that sounded like steam escaping a radiator. The sound moved in a slow circle around their camp, never coming closer than 30 yards, but never retreating either. Derek had his tranquilizer rifle assembled in seconds, muscle memory from his army days taking over. Motion sensors show it's big, he whispered, checking his tablet. Really big. Moving at about 2 miles per hour, maintaining perfect distance. This isn't random animal behavior, it's reconnaissance. The breathing continued for 20 minutes, a psychological warfare campaign that worked better than any direct attack. By the time the sound faded into the distance, all 3 of them were wired on adrenaline and the crushing certainty that they were being studied by something far more intelligent than they'd anticipated. Morning brought fresh tracks circling their campsite, confirming Derek's sensor data. The creature had walked a perfect perimeter, stopping at regular intervals. At each stop, the prints showed a different orientation, as if it had paused to examine their gear from multiple angles. It was learning, Emma said, studying the stride patterns. Look at these stopping points. Perfect sight lines to our tents, our equipment, the places we'd exit if we ran. This thing spent 20 minutes mapping our weaknesses. The realization hit Ryan like a physical blow. They weren't hunting an animal. They were hunting something that hunted back. They broke camp and followed the new trail deeper into the mountain interior, into territory marked on their maps as unsurveyable wilderness. The tracks led them up slopes so steep they needed climbing gear, through bramble thickets that shredded their clothing, across streams where the prints vanished and reappeared on the opposite bank with impossible precision. By afternoon, they were operating in terrain where GPS signals died completely and compass readings shifted unpredictably due to mineral deposits in the rock. If they lost the trail here, finding their way back would become a survival challenge all its own. That's when Emma spotted the structure. Hidden in a grove of ancient hemlocks, camouflaged with branches and moss, stood something that defied every assumption they'd made. A shelter roughly 8 feet tall and 12 feet across, constructed from deadfall timber and arranged with architectural precision. The entrance faced away from prevailing winds. Drainage channels had been dug around the perimeter. This isn't a den, Derek said slowly. This is engineering. They approached carefully, weapons ready, but the structure appeared empty. Inside, they found artifacts that shattered their remaining preconceptions. Tools fashioned from stone and bone, shaped with obvious intelligence but designed for hands much larger than human. Baskets woven from mountain grass, filled with seeds and berries arranged by type, and bones, lots of bones from deer and rabbits and smaller game, cleaned and sorted with obsessive care. But the most disturbing discovery waited in the back corner, a collection of human artifacts, clearly taken from hikers and campers. Watches, pocket knives, pieces of clothing, all arranged in neat rows like trophies. And right there in the middle of the display, Ashley Chen's lens cap from her camera. It's been collecting from humans for a long time, Emma said, studying the arrangement. Some of this gear is years old, faded and weathered. This thing has been watching people, taking things, learning about us for much longer than we realized. Ryan picked up a watch, noting the date on the inscription. 2018, 3 years ago. How many hikers had encountered this creature without reporting it? How many had seen something, been too scared or too embarrassed to tell anyone, and just left the park quietly? The shelter told a story that rewrote everything. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was something with culture, technology appropriate to its environment, and a long-term interest in human behavior that had recently escalated. They rigged motion cameras around the shelter and withdrew to an observation post 300 yards uphill. If the creature returned to its home base, they'd get clear footage and a chance to plan a capture approach. Then the motion sensors triggered. Ryan watched through binoculars as the creature moved through the forest like something that had never learned to fear. No stealth, no caution, just purposeful strides that covered ground with frightening efficiency. Even at distance, the size was shocking. Nearly 8 feet tall, shoulders broad enough to fill doorways, arms that hung past where human knees would be. Dark hair covered most of its body, but the face was visible, almost human, but stretched and exaggerated like a caricature. But the eyes were what froze Ryan's blood. Dark, intelligent, focused with an intensity that spoke of complex thought processes. This wasn't an animal operating on instinct. This was a thinking being, and it was angry. The creature examined its shelter with obvious agitation, immediately noticing their disturbance. It picked up objects they'd moved, returning them to original positions with precise care. When it found their scent trail, it followed their path through the shelter step by step, reconstructing their entire investigation. Then it looked directly at their hiding spot. The distance was 300 yards. Dense forest, careful camouflage, elevated position. By every rule of fieldcraft, they should have been invisible. But those dark eyes fixed on their location with absolute certainty, and the creature's lips pulled back in what could only be described as a smile. It knew exactly where they were, and it was letting them know. "We need to move," Derek whispered. "Right now." The creature picked up one of their motion cameras, studied it for several seconds, then crushed it between its hands like crumpling paper. It repeated the process with each camera, destroying their surveillance network with methodical precision. When it finished, it sat down cross-legged in front of its shelter and waited. The message was clear. It knew they were watching. It knew they were planning something. And it was ready for whatever came next. They relocated to a position 2 miles away and spent that night developing their capture strategy. Derek's military training proved invaluable, breaking down the problem into tactical components: mobility, strength, intelligence, terrain, familiarity. Every advantage belonged to their target, except one: equipment. Tranquilizers won't work reliably, Derek explained, sketching diagrams by flashlight. Too many variables with an unknown species. Body weight, metabolism, adrenaline response. We could underdose and just piss it off, or overdose and kill it. Emma suggested a net system instead, something physical that doesn't rely on chemical intervention. If we can funnel it into a choke point, maybe between those 2 big hemlocks near the creek crossing, set up a trap that triggers when it breaks the plane. Ryan knew the location she meant. A natural bottleneck where the creek cut between 2 massive trees, creating a passage barely wide enough for something the creature's size. If they could drive it toward that point and spring a net system, they might have a chance. The plan was complex but theoretically sound. Motion sensors to detect approach. Steel cable nets designed for capturing large wildlife, modified for something even bigger. Backup restraints in case the primary system failed. Derek calculated load bearings and trigger mechanisms while Emma mapped approach routes and escape vectors. But even as they planned, Ryan couldn't shake the memory of those intelligent eyes. The way the creature had dismantled their surveillance with such casual precision, they were preparing to capture something that had already demonstrated it could think several steps ahead of them. Thing is, they didn't have a choice anymore. The creature was escalating. The Garcia family was still missing. More people would get hurt or worse if they didn't act. Morning brought the execution phase. They spent 4 hours rigging the trap, testing each component multiple times. The net system used counterweights, and pulleys to create a snare that would activate when pressure plates detected significant weight on the approach path. Once triggered, steel cables would deploy from 4 directions, creating a containment perimeter too strong for even something the creature's size to break. The hard part would be driving it toward the trap. Ryan volunteered to serve as the lure, a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. The creature had shown interest in human activity, particularly lone individuals. If he positioned himself on the far side of the trap and made enough noise to attract attention, it might investigate and trigger the snare. "You'll have maybe 30 seconds once it commits to approach," Derek warned, checking Ryan's radio for the 3rd time. "Soon as those motion sensors light up, you run. Don't look back. Don't hesitate. Just cover ground as fast as possible. We'll trigger the net once you're clear." Emma handed him an emergency beacon. "Anything goes wrong, you hit this button. GPS coordinates go straight to the station and the sheriff's department. They'll have helicopters in the air within 20 minutes. Ryan took position at 7 in the morning, a quarter mile beyond the trap site. The plan called for him to create a disturbance that would seem like normal human activity, set up a fake campsite, play music from his phone, make cooking sounds, be visible and vulnerable, and attractive to something that had been studying human behavior for years. The waiting was agony. Every bird call sounded like footsteps. Every wind gust through the trees became breathing in the distance. Ryan found himself checking the time every few minutes, wondering how long this would take. The answer was 2 hours and 17 minutes. His radio crackled with Emma's voice, barely a whisper. Motion sensors lighting up. Big signature, moving your direction from the northwest. Range about 400 yards and closing. Ryan's heart rate doubled instantly. 400 yards meant maybe 3 minutes before visual contact, depending on terrain and approach speed. "Copy that," he whispered back, maintaining position until visual confirmation. 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, he saw it, moving through the forest toward his fake campsite, massive and dark between the trees. The size was even more shocking at close range, those broad shoulders and long arms giving it a silhouette that registered as wrong on every instinctive level. But the movement was what made Ryan's throat go dry. Purposeful, coordinated, showing none of the caution wild animals displayed around human activity. It wasn't approaching his camp, it was stalking it. Visual contact confirmed, Ryan radioed. Beginning withdrawal to checkpoint Alpha. Negative. Derek's voice came back immediately. Hold position until it commits to the funnel. If you move too early, it might break off. The creature stopped 50 yards from Ryan's campsite, partially concealed behind a large Douglas fir. Ryan could see its head moving as it studied the area, taking in details with obvious intelligence. Close enough now that he could hear its breathing, that same deep rhythmic sound that had circled their camp nights earlier. Then it stepped into the clearing, and Ryan understood why people had been so terrified they could barely speak coherently. Up close, the creature's face combined human and animal features in ways that created an instinctive revulsion response. Eyes too large, set under a prominent brow ridge, nose broad and flat, but the mouth was the worst part, too wide, filled with teeth designed for tearing. It examined Ryan's abandoned campsite with systematic thoroughness, picking up objects and studying them before setting them down in different locations. When it found the pot he'd been using to make noise, it held the metal container up to the light and tapped it with one massive finger, listening to the sound with obvious curiosity. "It's investigating," Ryan whispered into his radio, taking its time. "No aggression yet. Stay put," Emma's voice came back. "Let it get comfortable, then start your withdrawal. We need it following you, not just exploring." The creature spent 10 more minutes examining the fake campsite, paying particular attention to anything that carried Ryan's scent. It held his spare shirt up to its nose for several seconds, breathing deeply, memorizing his smell. When it finally dropped the shirt and looked in Ryan's direction, those dark eyes fixed on his hiding spot with certainty. Distance and concealment meant nothing to senses evolved for tracking in dense forest. "It knows I'm here," Ryan whispered. Beginning withdrawal now, he started moving toward the trap site, making enough noise to maintain the creature's interest without appearing to flee. Behind him, heavy footsteps began following, maintaining a distance of about 30 yards, close enough to keep him in sight, far enough to avoid potential threats. The walk to the trap site became the longest quarter mile of Ryan's life. Every step required balancing speed with stealth, maintaining enough distance to avoid confrontation while ensuring he didn't lose his pursuer. The creature's footsteps provided constant reminder of its presence, heavy impacts that seemed to shake the ground. Approaching checkpoint Alpha, Ryan radioed when the trap came into view. Target maintaining pursuit. Estimate 30 seconds to trigger zone. Copy, Derek responded. System armed. Cross the trigger line and keep moving. We'll activate once you're clear. 20 yards from the trigger line, Ryan heard the creature's pace increase. 15 yards. A low growl echoed behind him, sound like machinery grinding under too much load. 10 yards. He broke into a run. The creature responded immediately, powerful legs launching it forward. Ryan crossed the trigger line at full sprint, hearing the motion sensors activate with sharp electronic beeps. Behind him, the creature's footsteps pounded across the pressure plates. Trigger activated. Derek's voice exploded through the radio. Net deployment in 3, 2, 1. The sound of steel cables under tension filled the forest as counterweights dropped and pulleys screamed. Ryan dove behind the nearest tree and spun around to see their trap in action. 4 nets converging on the space between the hemlock trees with mechanical precision. The creature tried to stop when it saw the nets deploying, but momentum and the confined space worked against it. Steel cables closed around its massive frame, tightening automatically as the system engaged. It roared a sound that seemed to shake leaves from trees, but the nets held. Target secured. Derek shouted over the radio. Net integrity holding. Moving to Phase 2. Phase 2 involved secondary restraints, steel shackles designed for dangerous wildlife. Modified for something much larger, the creature thrashed against the nets, testing their strength with systematic precision, but the cables were rated for loads far exceeding its body weight. As they approached with the shackles, the creature stopped struggling and watched them with those intelligent eyes. No panic, no mindless rage, just calculation. Even captured, it was still learning. Easy, Emma said. More to them than to the creature. It's not fighting anymore. That might mean it's planning something. Derek moved forward with the first shackle. As he reached through the net, the creature extended its arm in what seemed like cooperation. For a moment, Ryan thought the capture might proceed without incident. Then the creature grabbed Derek's wrist. The movement was faster than anything that size should have been capable of. 1 second Derek was attaching the shackle. The next he was pulled against the net with enough force to drive the air from his lungs. The creature's grip was precise, controlling Derek's position without causing injury. Let him go, Ryan shouted, raising his tranquilizer rifle. The creature looked at Ryan and shook its head. A clear, deliberate gesture of refusal. It said something then, sounds like rocks grinding together, but with structure. Patterns, maybe language. Then it released Derek and extended both arms toward the shackles, wrists positioned for easy attachment. The message was unmistakable. It would cooperate, but it had wanted to demonstrate that cooperation was a choice, not submission. They secured the shackles with hands that shook from adrenaline and the psychological impact of what they'd just witnessed. This wasn't an animal they'd captured. This was a being with language, with concepts of negotiation, with cognitive abilities that forced them to reconsider everything. The creature sat quietly once restrained, studying each of them. It spoke again, those same grinding sounds with different intonations. When they didn't respond, it pointed at itself and made a sound that might have been a name. It's trying to tell us something, Emma whispered. Those sounds aren't random. There's structure. It might actually be trying to introduce itself. Ryan felt the implications hit like a freight train. They hadn't captured a dangerous animal. They'd captured what might be the last member of an unknown species. Something intelligent enough for language and culture. Something that had been trying to coexist with human expansion until desperation drove it to more direct confrontation. The attacks might not have been predation. They might have been attempts at communication that went wrong. Territorial displays meant to discourage human encroachment. The arranged campsites and collected artifacts. Efforts to understand the new neighbors who kept invading its home. As they prepared for the long journey back to the ranger station, the creature sat quietly in its restraints, occasionally making those grinding sounds. No aggression, no escape attempts, just patient resignation. Thing about capturing something that shouldn't exist is that success forces you to confront questions you never thought to ask. Questions about intelligence and communication, about territorial rights and coexistence, about what constitutes civilization and who gets to decide. As they led their captive through the mountains, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling they'd just made first contact with something remarkable, something that had been trying to make contact all along. If only they'd been smart enough to listen. The hardest part wasn't the capture. The hardest part was the 7-mile hike back with a 9-foot intelligent being that kept trying to talk to them in a language made of grinding rocks and what sounded almost like clicking consonants. Every time the creature made those sounds, Ryan felt his worldview crack a little more. They took turns walking point while two stayed with the creature. It moved cooperatively, never fighting the restraints, but those eyes never stopped watching. Learning, recording every detail of their equipment, their communication methods, their body language. Ryan had the uncomfortable realization that this thing probably understood more about them than they understood about it. Around mile 3, Derek's radio squawked, Sheriff Harris, demanding an update. Derek glanced at the creature, which was watching him with obvious interest. We've secured the target, heading back to the staging area. ETA about 4 hours. What kind of target are we talking about? Harris's voice had an edge to it. Bear? Mountain lion? Neither, Derek said carefully. You're going to want to see this yourself, Sheriff. I don't think you'd believe us if we tried to explain over the radio. Silence on the other end. Then, is it dangerous? The creature chose that moment to make a sound low and rumbling, almost like it was answering the question itself. Emma actually jumped. Potentially, Derek said, but it's cooperating. We've got it restrained and under control. Just prepare yourself. This isn't what we expected. They reached the staging area at obstruction point just before sunset. A crowd had gathered park rangers, sheriff's deputies, a few wildlife specialists from the University of Washington, and way too many reporters who'd somehow gotten wind something big was happening. News vans lined the parking area. Cameras pointed at the trailhead. Shit, Ryan muttered, stopping at the edge of the clearing. This is going to be a circus. Already is, Emma said, nodding toward the crowd. Look at all those cameras. We walk out there with that thing, and this goes viral in about 30 seconds. The creature made another sound quieter this time, almost questioning. It had stopped walking and was staring at the vehicles and people with what Ryan could only describe as apprehension, maybe even fear. It knows what this means, Derek said quietly. Look at its body language. It understands we're taking it to where there are more humans. Ryan studied the creature's face. The eyes were wider now, the breathing faster, fight or flight response, but it wasn't fighting. It was choosing to stay restrained despite obvious fear. That took a level of self-control and trust that made Ryan's chest tighten. We can't just parade it out there like a trophy, Emma said. These people, they're going to treat it like an animal. But it's not. You saw what it did back there. The tools, the shelter, the language. This is a person. A different kind of person, but still. Ryan keyed his radio. Sheriff Harris, this is Ranger Mitchell. We need to do this controlled. Clear the civilians and media. Just essential personnel. This situation is more sensitive than you realize. Mitchell, I've got 3 news crews threatening to sue if we don't let them document whatever you're bringing in. The public has a right to not cause a panic, Ryan interrupted. Sir, with respect, you need to trust me on this. What we've found, it changes things. We need time to assess before we go public. Another pause. Then Harris's voice came back. All business. Copy that. Give me 15 minutes to clear the area. Come in through the service road entrance, not the main parking lot. I'll have medical standing by. Negative on medical, Ryan said quickly, glancing at the creature. It's not injured, and I don't think it's going to react well to being surrounded by more people trying to poke at it. We need a secure, quiet location for containment and communication. Communication? Harris sounded skeptical. Mitchell, what exactly are we dealing with here? Ryan looked at the creature, which was watching him with those dark, intelligent eyes. I'll explain when we get there. Just trust me, Sheriff, please. The service road entrance was less chaotic, but still tense. Harris had kept his word, only essential personnel remained. But even they couldn't hide their reactions when Ryan's team emerged from the tree line with their captive. The creature stopped at the edge of the clearing, surveying the assembled humans with obvious wariness. It made a sound long and complex, with what sounded like different syllables or phonemes. Ryan had no idea what it meant, but the tone was clear enough. A question, maybe, or a warning. Dr. Patricia Chen, the wildlife specialist from UW, approached slowly with her hands visible and empty. She was a primatologist, specializing in great ape behavior. And to her credit, she didn't show the shock Ryan had expected. My God, she breathed, stopping about 10 feet away. The proportions, the facial structure, the obvious intelligence in the eyes. This is impossible. Yeah, we're kind of figuring that out, Derek said dryly. Dr. Chen circled slowly, maintaining distance, observing. The creature watched her, but didn't react aggressively. If anything, it seemed curious about her careful approach. Its behavior suggests high-level cognition, Dr. Chen said, her voice taking on the clinical tone of a researcher documenting something extraordinary. Notice the eye tracking, it's following not just movement, but patterns. When Deputy Williams shifted his weight, it glanced at his holster. It understands tools and potential threats. It does more than understand them, Emma said. We found its shelter. It makes tools, baskets. It stores food, and it's been collecting human artifacts for years. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. Collecting? As in curating. That suggests culture, Ryan finished. Yeah, and language. It's been trying to talk to us for the last 4 hours. Let me hear. Ryan nodded to the creature and made a gesture, hand open, palm up. He had no idea if it would understand, but he was trying. Can you speak again, please? The creature tilted its head, studying him. Then it made another sound, deliberate and clear. Rock-grinding consonants mixed with what might have been vowel sounds. The structure was unmistakable. This wasn't random animal vocalization. This was language. Dr. Chen's hand went to her mouth. Oh my God, the phoneme complexity, the intentional pauses between phrases. This is actual linguistic communication. So what is it? Sheriff Harris asked. He'd been silent until now, just watching, but his tone suggested he was running out of patience with the academic analysis. Some kind of undiscovered ape? A hoax? What? Neither, Dr. Chen said firmly. The skeletal structure visible through its musculature, the bipedal adaptation, the cranial proportions, this isn't consistent with any known primate species. And it's certainly not a hoax. You can't fake this level of biological reality. Then what? I think, Doctor, Chen said slowly, we're looking at a relict hominid population, a species that branched off from the human family tree hundreds of thousands of years ago and survived in isolation. What cryptozoologists have been calling Sasquatch or Bigfoot for decades. The creature made another sound at that sharp and almost like a bark. Dr. Chen jumped. Did it just react to the name? Emma asked. I think it did, Ryan said, studying the creature's face. Maybe it knows what we call them, or maybe it was reacting to the tone. Either way, it's listening and comprehending on some level. Sheriff Harris rubbed his face, looking exhausted. Okay, so assuming all this is real and Jesus, I can't believe I'm saying this. What do we do with it? We can't just hold it here indefinitely. We need a proper facility, Dr. Chen said. Secure but humane. This isn't a wild animal we're dealing with. This is potentially a sentient being with rights we don't even have legal frameworks for. Rights? Harris looked incredulous. Doc, this thing was terrorizing hikers. The Garcia family is still missing. We've got 4 more reports of aggressive encounters. You want to talk about its rights? Were they aggressive encounters or attempts at communication? Dr. Chen shot back. If an isolated tribe of humans kept having their territory invaded by strangers, they might get aggressive too. That doesn't make them animals. The Garcia family might still be alive, Ryan interrupted. He'd been thinking about this for hours. We never found bodies. And this creature, look at it. It's had multiple opportunities to hurt us, including when Derek tried to shackle it. But it didn't. It demonstrated restraint, intelligence. Maybe the Garcias are still out there. The creature made another sound, urgent and complex. It pulled against the restraint slightly, not aggressively, but like it was trying to get their attention. It's responding to the conversation, Emma said. It knows we're talking about something important. Ryan made a decision that felt both crazy and necessary. He approached the creature slowly, hands visible. Do you know where the family is? The people who went missing? Man? Woman? 2 children? The creature's eyes tracked his movements. It made a sound softer now, almost gentle. Then it pointed with its restrained hands toward the mountains, toward Devil's Basin. Holy shit, Derek breathed. It's answering you. Or it's randomly pointing, Harris said. But his tone was less certain now. No, Dr. Chen said firmly. Look at the deliberation. The eye contact while gesturing. That's intentional communication. It's trying to tell you something. Ryan's mind raced. If the creature knew where the Garcias were, if they were still alive somewhere in its territory, Sheriff, we need to go back out. Tonight. Mitchell, you just spent 7 hours hauling that thing in. You're exhausted, and the Garcias might be running out of time, Ryan countered. If there's any chance they're alive, we have to look. Based on a hand gesture from something we found 2 hours ago, Harris shook his head. That's not enough. The creature made another sound louder, more insistent. It pulled harder at the restraints, and for the first time showed real agitation. Then it did something that made everyone freeze. It spoke, not the grinding rock sounds of its language, but an approximation of human speech. Rough and distorted, but unmistakable. Live. The word hung in the air. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Did it just? Harris couldn't finish the sentence. It said alive, Emma whispered. It was listening to us talk, and it learned the word, and it's telling us the Garcias are alive. Dr. Chen looked like she might faint. The cognitive ability required to isolate phonemes from a foreign language, understand context, and reproduce them vocally. That's comparable to human intelligence, maybe beyond it, considering the anatomical differences in vocal structures. The creature spoke again, the same rough word, live. Then it pointed again toward the mountains, more urgently this time. Ryan looked at Sheriff Harris. We're going back. Now. The second expedition was thrown together in 30 minutes. Ryan, Emma, and Derek, because they knew the territory. 2 deputies for backup. Doctor. Chen insisted on coming, despite having 0 wilderness experience, arguing that if they were going to interact with this creature, they needed someone who understood primate communication, and they brought the creature. That decision caused a near mutiny from Harris's deputies, but Ryan stood firm. It's trying to lead us somewhere, trying to help. We're not leaving it behind. They removed the heavier restraints, but kept steel cuffs on its wrists, connected by a chain that allowed movement, but prevented it from running or attacking. The creature accepted this without resistance, almost like it understood the compromise. The hike back into Devil's Basin at night was surreal. They moved by headlamp and moonlight, following the creature as it led them along paths Ryan hadn't even known existed. It moved with confidence through the darkness, occasionally pausing to make sounds that might have been navigation markers or warnings about terrain. "Notice how it's adjusting its pace for us," Dr. Chen said quietly, keeping up surprisingly well for someone who spent most of her time in labs. "When we lag, it slows. That's theory of mind understanding, that we can't move as fast as it can." 3 miles in, the creature stopped at a rock formation Ryan recognized, the feeding site where they'd found the cached deer. The creature gestured toward a narrow opening between boulders that Ryan had assumed was just a shadow. "There's a passage here," Emma said, shining her light into the gap. "Goes back at least 20 feet. Can't see where it leads." The creature made an encouraging sound and squeezed through the opening with surprising ease despite its size. The humans followed, struggling with their bulkier equipment and more rigid spines. The passage opened into a cavern natural limestone formation, maybe 50 feet across and 20 high. And there, in the back corner, huddled together around a small fire, were the Garcias. "Holy shit," Derek breathed. Miguel Garcia jumped up at the sight of them, holding a makeshift club. "Stay back, whatever you are." Then his eyes adjusted to the headlamps and he saw human faces. "Oh, thank God, thank God. Please tell me you're real." "We're real," Ryan said quickly, raising his hands. "Park rangers. We've been searching for you for 5 days. Are you all okay?" Carmen Garcia was crying, holding her 2 kids close. The children looked terrified but unharmed. We thought no one would find us, that we'd die down here." "What happened?" Emma asked, already checking the family over for injuries. "Your campsite was destroyed. We thought." "That thing destroyed it," Miguel said, pointing at the creature that had led them here. "It came into our camp in the middle of the night. I thought it was going to kill us. I tried to fight it, but it was so strong. It grabbed me and Carmen and just carried us. Brought us here." "Carried you?" Ryan repeated, looking at the creature. It was sitting quietly near the cavern entrance, watching the reunion with what looked like satisfaction. "We tried to run," Carmen said, her voice shaking. "But every time, it would find us and bring us back. It brought us food berries, clean water and some kind of container it made. It kept the fire going, but it wouldn't let us leave." "Why?" Harris asked, confused. "Why keep you alive? Why not?" "I don't think it wanted to hurt us," Miguel said slowly, studying the creature. "I think it was trying to protect us. There was a storm 3 nights ago, remember? Heavy rain, wind. We would have died of hypothermia out there. But it kept the fire going all night. It brought more wood every time it burned down." Ryan felt the pieces clicking together. The attacks weren't attacks. You were camping in its territory, in an area it knows is dangerous during storms. It was trying to move you to safety. But the destroyed campsite, Harris protested. "The violence, ever try to rescue someone who's fighting you?" Derek said quietly. "Sometimes saving someone looks violent when they don't understand you're helping." "Doctor." Chen approached the creature slowly. "You kept them safe," she said, knowing it probably couldn't understand the words, but hoping it might catch the tone. "You protected them." The creature made a soft sound almost like a sigh. Then it gestured to the Garcia family and then to the cavern entrance. The meaning was clear. "Take them home." "It was waiting," Emma said, wonder in her voice. "All this time, it was keeping them alive and waiting for us to find them. It knew we were searching. That's why it started showing itself more, leaving clearer signs. It was trying to get our attention so we'd come get them." "But why not just let them go?" Harris asked. "Maybe it tried," Miguel said. "The first night, after it brought us here, it left. We tried to find our way out, but we got lost in the dark. These caves, they're like a maze. We ended up back here by accident. The creature found us and I think it realized we couldn't navigate out on our own." Carmen nodded. "After that, it stayed close, always watching. We thought it was holding us prisoner, but maybe it was making sure you didn't get lost and die," Ryan finished. "Jesus, we've been hunting something that was trying to help." The hike out took 3 hours. The Garcia kids were exhausted, so Derek and one of the deputies took turns carrying them. The creature led the way, its body language more relaxed now, like a weight had been lifted. At the trailhead, an ambulance was waiting for the Garcia family. News crews had gathered again despite Harris's orders, and cameras caught everything, the family emerging alive, the rangers helping them, and behind them, the massive figure that had kept them alive. The footage went viral within an hour. By morning, it was international news. Bigfoot saves missing family read one headline. Real Sasquatch, documented in Olympic National Park, claimed another. Mysterious hominid shows intelligence. Compassion from the more scientific publications. The shitstorm that followed was predictable, but still overwhelming. Federal agencies descended on the park. Fish and Wildlife, CDC, Department of Interior, even Homeland Security showed up with questions about potential threats. Animal rights groups demanded the creature's release. Cryptozoologists flooded in claiming they'd been right all along. Media circled like sharks, demanding interviews, access, proof, and through it all, the creature sat calmly in the converted barn they'd set up as temporary housing, watching the chaos with those intelligent eyes. Dr. Chen spent 12 hours a day working with it, trying to establish communication. She brought pictures, simple tools, recorded sounds. The creature engaged with everything she showed it, demonstrating problem-solving abilities that exceeded most great apes. On day 3, it drew a picture. Dr. Chen brought Ryan in to see it, her hands shaking with excitement. On a large pad of paper, using charcoal they'd provided, the creature had drawn a rough map. Mountains, valleys, marked locations, and stick figures, lots of them. It's showing us its territory, Dr. Chen said. And look here, these figures. I think it's showing us its family, or its tribe. Ryan, I don't think this is the only one. Ryan studied the drawing, counting the stick figures. 15, maybe 20. There's more of them out there. An entire population, Dr. Chen confirmed, living in the deepest parts of the wilderness, avoiding human contact. But this one, I think it might be younger, more curious. That's why it got close enough to interact with hikers. And why it tried to help the Garcias, Ryan said. It saw people in danger, and its instinct was to protect them, even though that meant revealing itself. Over the following weeks, more details emerged. Other rangers reported signs they'd dismissed structures in the wilderness, unusual tracks, sounds that didn't match known wildlife. Looking back through years of incident reports, patterns emerged of a population that had been there all along, just carefully avoiding detection. The creature they'd captured, they started calling it Walker, because it seemed to respond to the sound, became the center of an unprecedented scientific and ethical debate. Was it an animal subject to wildlife laws? A person with human rights? Something entirely new that existing laws couldn't address. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after the capture. Dr. Chen had been working with Walker using a tablet computer, showing pictures and recording its responses. Walker had shown interest in the technology, touching the screen carefully with those massive fingers. One day, Walker took the tablet from Dr. Chen and began tapping the screen deliberately. It brought up the keyboard and, moving slowly and carefully, typed a single word. Home. Dr. Chen called Ryan immediately. When he arrived, Walker typed another message. Family waiting. It wants to go back, Ryan said, feeling emotion tighten his throat. It has people waiting for it. Walker typed again. Thank you, help family. It's thanking us, Dr. Chen whispered, for finding the Garcias, for understanding. Then Walker typed the words that would change everything. We watch you. You watch us. Both live together? Ryan stared at the screen, understanding the question. Could humans and this other intelligent species share the same mountains? Could they coexist without one destroying the other? He thought about the Garcia family, alive because Walker had protected them. About the years this population had lived hidden, avoiding conflict, taking only what they needed from the wilderness. About the intelligence in those dark eyes and the language in those grinding sounds. Yeah, Ryan said, reaching out slowly to place his hand palm up on the table between them. Both lived together. Walker reached out with one massive hand and placed it over Ryan's, the gesture gentle despite the obvious strength. Agreement, treaty, understanding between two species that had just learned to communicate. The release happened quietly, without media fanfare. Ryan, Emma, Derek, Dr. Chen, and Walker hiked back into Devil's Basin under cover of night. At the edge of the territory they'd first found the shelter, Walker stopped. Other figures emerged from the darkness. Tall, massive, moving with that same fluid grace. Walker's family, its tribe. They approached cautiously, studying the humans with obvious wariness. Walker made a long series of sounds, its language, but longer and more complex than anything they'd heard before. Explaining, Ryan thought, telling the story of what happened, of the humans who captured and then released, of the agreement they'd made. One of the others approached, taller than Walker, with graying hair around its face. It studied Ryan for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been acknowledgement. Not trust, exactly, but recognition, acceptance of the temporary truce. Walker turned back to the humans one last time. It touched the tablet doctor. Chen had given it to keep, now loaded with thousands of images and simple communication tools. Then it pointed at Ryan and made a sound they'd learned meant friend. Friend, Ryan repeated, his voice rough. Then Walker and its family melted back into the forest, as silently as they'd appeared. Gone, but not extinct. Hidden, but not helpless. Sharing the wilderness with humanity, as they had been for thousands of years. The drive back was quiet, everyone lost in their own thoughts. At the station, Harris was waiting with the inevitable questions about the release, the lack of documentation, the missed opportunity for science. We documented everything that mattered, Ryan said simply. Dr. Chen has hours of video, genetic samples, behavioral data, but keeping it locked up, that wouldn't have been documentation. That would have been cruelty. The feds aren't happy. The feds can deal. Ryan was too tired to care about politics. We made first contact with another intelligent species. We proved they exist, that they're not a threat, and we established a framework for coexistence. That's what matters. Harris studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Get some sleep, Mitchell. You've earned it. Ryan went home to his cabin and slept for 14 hours straight. When he woke, he checked the security cameras he'd installed around his property, a habit now, after everything. On the footage from the previous night, at the edge of his property where forest met clearing, he saw a familiar, massive figure. Walker, standing in the moonlight, looking toward the cabin. The creature raised one hand in what might have been a wave, then vanished back into the trees. Ryan smiled and saved the footage, proof that the agreement was holding. That sometimes, the best thing humans can do when they discover something extraordinary is recognize it, respect it, and leave it in peace. 3 years later, Olympic National Park operates under new protocols. Deep wilderness areas are designated as shared territory, monitored but not patrolled, open to hiking but with strict guidelines about behavior and waste management. Sightings are still rare, but they happen. Hikers report glimpses of massive figures watching from tree lines. Trail cameras occasionally capture blurry images. Woodknocks echo through certain valleys at dawn and dusk. And in the backcountry, in places humans rarely go, there are structures. Shelters built with obvious intelligence, food caches arranged with systematic care, territories marked with symbols that researchers are slowly learning to interpret. Two intelligent species, sharing one wilderness, learning to coexist, learning to communicate, however imperfectly. The Garcia family comes back to the park every year, always hiking with rangers, always respectful of the boundaries. Miguel says they're trying to find Walker again, to thank it properly. So far, no luck. But sometimes, late at night in Devil's Basin, they hear those grinding rock sounds echoing through the darkness, and they know they're not alone. Ryan still works as a ranger, but now he leads a special team dedicated to human-hominid relations. It's a weird job title, but it fits. They monitor the shared territories, investigate incidents, and serve as intermediaries when needed. It's groundbreaking work, the kind of thing that shows up in scientific journals and documentaries. But for Ryan, it's simpler than that. He made a friend once, out in the wilderness, a friend who showed him that intelligence comes in forms humans never expected, that civilization isn't defined by technology, and that the deepest wisdom might belong to those who choose to live hidden rather than revealed. On quiet nights, Ryan sits on his porch with coffee and watches the tree line. Sometimes, he sees movement out there, large shapes moving with purpose through the darkness. He never approaches, never tries to document or capture. He just watches, and knows they're watching back, both living together, just like they agreed. The thing about discovering something that shouldn't exist is that it forces you to reconsider everything else you thought impossible. Ryan doesn't believe in much supernatural stuff, ghosts, aliens. Most of that cryptid nonsense still seems like bullshit to him. But Bigfoot? Yeah, Bigfoot's real. He's got the scars and the memories and the treaty to prove it. And somewhere in the mountains of Olympic National Park, there's a creature with dark, intelligent eyes and hands that can build tools, who keeps watch over its territory and occasionally, just occasionally, reaches out to the neighbors who learn to say hello back. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Daniel Miller learned that. But some mysteries, the really important ones, those need to be acknowledged, understood, and protected. That's the real story here. Not that monsters exist in the woods, but that intelligence and compassion exist in forms we never expected to find. Ryan checks his security cameras every morning now, not from fear, but from hope. Hope that he'll see that familiar massive figure at the edge of his property, reminding him that the world is bigger and stranger and more wonderful than any human ever imagined. And some mornings, he does.